Hello, everybody. Again, here for science. Very excited. So today we have the second segment of science, which is going to be on sensors in extended reality, virtual reality. We have some great panelists with me, and also I have Lee Grossman from OREF. Come on, Lee. Here you are. We have, for the panel, we have Jeff Lutz from UCSF. And Corey Kaldash. Here you are. Oh, here you are. Fantastic. Guys, have a seat. I remind you that we still have Slido going on, so you will please answer those questions and then evaluate the papers so that we can select a winner. So let's start. Lee, you want to say something about yourself in OREF?
Yeah, I'm with OREF, and for those of you that don't know who we are, we're the largest independent organization that funds orthopedic research. We, in our 65-year history, we've done about $150 million of grants and about 40, which is about 4,700 research and educational grants that we funded over the years. We can't do this by ourselves. We collaborate with over 60 organizations. And one of the reasons we're here is that we're expanding using our very detailed, rigorous scientific process for approving grants. We're looking for opportunities to partner as well with private equity, venture capital, industry, et cetera. Right now, we have about 100 grants that we're managing with a street value of about $8 million. Please come to our website, oref.org. We have money to give. We have grant cycles going on most of the year, so there's money there available for you. And also go there because all of you here, your families, your neighbors, everyone has benefited mightily from the research that OREF has done over its 65 years and the work that we continue to do. We're 100% donor funded, so please go there and give generously.
Thank you. Jeff.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lutz. I'm Vice Chair of Research in Orthopedic Surgery. I'm a bioengineer by training and have gotten more interested in data sensors in relationship to musculoskeletal pain as part of an initiative via HEAL. So there's some fun topics I think that'll come out of this conversation informed by that experience.
Thank you. Corey.
Yes, Corey Kaldash. I'm the token orthopedic surgeon on the panel, so thanks for that. I think Beanie actually sent the email to the wrong person, but I'm honored to be with you. I thought one of the exhibitors said it well. I was walking around. She said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm an orthopedic surgeon." And she said, "Well, why are you here?" And I said, "I'm still trying to answer that." So hopefully we'll provide some clinical context into what you're doing. I can tell you my eyes have been open wide to what is out there. And hopefully, Dr. Beanie and I were just talking about this, hopefully we can get more clinicians involved so that this process, everything you know, this process and research that you're doing, we can help speed it up and be more efficient with it. So hopefully we'll see some of that today.
Perfect. So let's start our first paper, osteosurface electronics, thin, wireless, battery-free, and multimodal musculoskeletal biointerface. So the objective of this paper was development of a new class of a wireless battery-free device to be used as a diagnostic and therapeutic platform. Corey.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you started with me. I was just in clinic on Tuesday thinking about how can I provide a stable optical, electromagnetic, mechanical impedance model for my patients, and this study popped up. So, look, here's the reality. There was a speaker yesterday that talked about the third cause of death as medical errors. I looked that up last night. That's no longer true. It's been challenged by Yale. Third most common cause of death is actually COVID for last year. We can argue about that later. But 1 and 2 are heart disease and cancer, as you well know. But fragility fractures, so fractures of pathological bone, account for more hospital days than MIs, breast, and prostate cancer. So bone health is a major issue, and the reality is we don't know a ton about bone health, and our delays in ability to evaluate, like this says, diagnostically evaluate the patient, but also evaluate our interventions are somewhat limited. So what this study did is they actually bonded a sensor, as I understand it, to the bone with calcium phosphate cement beads, essentially. They used some growth factors. So they adhered this sensor to the bone itself. It was stable at a week. It was perfectly ingrown about 27 days and could constantly give you information about strain across the bone and several other things, including, like I mentioned earlier, electromagnetic field, which we use for fracture union. So I think there's real potential with this technology because it's an implantable, and it communicates through an NFC. Now, you know, the NFCs is something you guys know about, but I don't really, although I learned that I wear one on my wrist. I actually come to these conferences, and if you hold your phone up to my wrist now, it will give you my contact information. So it's technology. This is what I liked about the article. It's technology that's already available. Every iPhone can communicate in this way, and they buried that in the sensor.
Perfect. Jeff.
Great, it's a great summary. So looking at it in a slightly different perspective, I think that what's interesting about this is it's, I think, an example, and the other articles are maybe similarly so, of a technology that is being, you know, the envelope is being pushed. Here, what's interesting is they've got multiple sensors in one device, so they're not only measuring bone strain, but they're measuring temperature, and they have the ability to actually implement some treatment response through the LED that's can also be controlled. The question is, how do you get to the next step of moving this type of a technology and aligning it with a clinical indication that's compelling from a business case? So if somebody's going to invest in really trying to understand how this is going to get used, because it wasn't clear to me in the article about why they picked temperature, strain, and this optical sensor, and so there may be some rationale for those three that could be aligned clinically. It's a very local footprint, so do you need multiple of these? You know, how long does the measurement have to be collected? And then the big challenge with these sensors is the dimension reduction or feature engineering. You know, what comes out of the time series data that gives the clinician a red, green, yellow light that tells them that there's something that needs to happen, and that component really requires close communication with clinicians. You know, I see we have a similar communication gap as we had with engineers and clinicians 30 years ago who wanted to understand stress and strain, and now it's with data scientists and trying to understand you know, the ability for the tools to extract information, but in the context that clinicians find actionable. So I think this is going to push us to getting to that stage.
I'm wondering if there's anybody in this audience that has worked with a similar technology as this. I'm not surprised. I found it fascinating. The ingenuity that went behind this is really remarkable. But I have the same question that you have. How do we translate this from an animal model to actual clinical practice? I think probably the engineering aspects of it in terms of sensors and the electronics are there, but what are the measurements? I mean, do we understand microstraining? Do we know the modularity for the bone stimulation that they're saying is perhaps therapeutic? So what will it take to get to that level, just understanding what those measurements should be so that this will work properly?
All right. Let's switch to the second one. Stretchable and suturable fiber sensor for wireless monitoring of connective tissue strain. The objective was to reduce the mismatch between sensor and tissue organs. Propose a wireless and suturable fiber straining sensing system to monitor biomechanical strain continuously. Ori.
Well, yeah, thanks again for starting with me. No, I would share with you clinically, we don't know a lot about ligament strain. I can tell you in a total knee replacement, when your surgeon puts in your knee replacement or your loved one's knee replacement, we put all the parts in there and then we kind of wiggle it back and forth. in order to assess the ligament tension. It's a fairly imprecise science, and it's one of the reasons why surgical disciplines really do have quite the flavor of art and not science. This has the ability to assess the tension across the ligament, not only intraoperatively, but also postoperatively. There is some good sensor work being done, the pressure across the joint intra-op, and how you can make changes to implants. But understand that's non-weight bearing. And so the ability to be able to measure tension across these ligaments, I think could provide great value. I'll let the other guys explain how in the world they did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this one and the next, I think, are similar in the sense that they're pretty simple. It's a capacitor that, as you stretch this, the configuration of those wires changes, and then the capacitance between them change, and then the resonance frequency of the whole system changes. So they look at the peak resonant frequency, and that tells you what the elongation is. And so it's a relative measurement. It's not an absolute. So you're looking at a change over time. So we'll need to obviously learn about, how it's well, it's sutured. It wasn't quite clear to me how they're going to do that. But if it's changing over time, is it, really the ligament that's changing, or is there something about the way this thing is tied down? But I think that's really could be valuable information, particularly in the short-term period after a procedure, and you're trying, particularly if you had to do ligament balancing was something that was part of the procedure, you can determine how that's proceeding.
Not to bias the rankings that people are going to have on this, but this technology was really just beyond belief for me, and in a positive way. I could see potentially the clinical advantages that this would provide with the feedback in such small measures and individual tendons and muscles. I mean, it seems like it has unlimited application. But it goes back to my previous question of, do we know what we're actually measuring? And that's going to have to be figured out first. And again, I want to ask the audience here, particularly the clinicians, from what you've heard so far, is this something that you would be interested in? Raise hands if you are.
Few hands. All right. Let's go to the next one. Smart fracture plate for quantifying fracture healing. So the objective here is to distinguish between phases of fracture healing, and they are measuring those forces with a smart fracture plate. Sorry.
Yeah, now this one actually makes sense to me. If I had more time, I'd go back and explain the capacitance equation from the last article, but pressing on here. This one actually makes a lot more sense. So this is literally a sensor embedded into the plate to see how much strain is in the plate itself. So obviously, this is an implant that's going to fail if the bone never heals, just to be quite simplistic about it. But again, I'll share you the color from the orthopedic surgeon perspective. If you have a fracture, now I think the one in the picture, if you go back a slide, the one in the picture has a defect. So this would be like a comminuted fracture. So the two bones are actually spanning a gap, right? So all the force, all the pressure is going through the plate, producing a very significant bend on that plate. So what they've done is they placed the sensor at that area of the plate that's going to see the most bending force. Again, I defer to my colleagues to the left to explain what in the world they're measuring. But the reality is that metal plate will eventually fail if it's asked to take the entire load. So what they did is they said, well, let's evaluate the size of these stages of healing. So there is primary bone healing where the bone ends actually are sitting beside each other. The bone grows straight across. But they're trying to simulate secondary bone healing, meaning forming with callus, right? So you get this, there's a gap to start, and then it fills in with this fibrous tissue, which I think they simulated by silicone. And then finally, bone callus fills it in. I think they used cement or some other surrogate. This is all in the lab, mind you. But they were able to show in that graph, blue, orange, gray, the decreasing strain through the plate or tension, or I'm probably using the wrong word there, I apologize, but the decreased forces through the plate itself. So how we on the orthopedic side do it now is we say, your fracture's not very comminuted. Maybe you'll start walking at 3 weeks. Or we say, oh man, that thing was really blown apart. We're going to wait until 6 weeks. Because the reality is we don't know how much force is going through the bone versus through the plate. So this would have immediate clinical application once we figure out what those forces are across the plate and what the plate can tolerate. You could advance their weight bearing a lot faster based on their individual healing.
Jeff?
Great. Yeah, and I think this is a good example of kind of matching the push and the pull, the push of the inventor and the pull of the clinician. I think they did a good job with this. I'm good friends with Eric Ledad, and that little sensor that's shown on the upper left there was kind of developed with another application in mind. And as an example of another use case, they have one of the graduate students learned that the signal is moisture sensitive. And so now they have a sensor they're developing to put in adult diapers to monitor whether or not in a nursing facility they should be changed. So I think he's done a good job of trying to think about what's the use going to be, how do I optimize the sensor for the application. What they've shown here is a little way to clip this thing to the side of an implant. It doesn't have to be built into the implant specifically, so you can imagine there's adapters that can go on multiple different kinds of implants that are basically using the same sensor. So I really appreciated that aspect of this.
Yeah, of the 3 articles that are being reviewed here, this one is probably the least impressive in terms of the technology advances, but in terms of its clinical application, its availability, I think, will be much earlier than the other 2. Again, the measuring of how this is going, how to determine if it's going to heal or go into non-union or become infectious, all that has to be worked out yet. But to have that available clinically would just be a game changer.
Yeah, I think many speakers during the conference, have said this. Yesterday, Daniel Kraft said it, I think, the most clear. He said, we don't want data, we want insights. And I thought that was really powerful. How I have crudely said that before is, I only want actionable data. I only want the data that tells me what to do next. And I want you to turn all the other lights off. And you guys talk about them when I'm not there. But this is where we are in the process. We want actionable data only because otherwise there's so much noise you can't see.
Remember to vote for this paper and score them. We'll go to the last part of this segment. Lee, you want to take us to 2037?
Well, yes. When we look at what this is going to be in 15 years, I just wanted to get your impressions on the 3 technologies that we were shown to were provided to us. How do you think that these will adapt and adjust, and which ones do you think will be most applicable soonest?
Listen, where we're going to be in 15 years, it all has to be passive. So everything you heard, the first paper was about batteryless and wireless. It all has to be passive, using technology that we already have. I mentioned that NFC chip that everybody already reads on their phone that I didn't even know existed until somebody sold me one of these. And so it has to all be passive, it has to be collected. Then you have to do all the important work of assimilating that data. If I had more time, I'd talk about sequence-to-sequence neural networks and things like, no, I'm just kidding. We have to figure out what the data means, then we have to deliver the insights. But the only ones that are going to break through, to your point, Lee, the only ones that are going to break through are the ones that are passive. Because every time you have to ask somebody to do something, or they have to plug them in, or, the more labor intensive it gets, the more difficult it is. We talk about sensors now, and the incredible presentation earlier from Google about wearable sensors, and it's incredible. And if you put it in a shoe, it's okay, because they're going to wear their shoes when they run, probably. But once you ask them to strap it on, you've introduced another barrier. And so we're going to get fragmented information, and you guys will figure out how to do a lot with very little data. I applaud you for it, but the reality is the best data is going to be passive, and it's going to be easily transferable back and forth.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the thing that we hopefully will have, which we'll need, is the ability to, identify these exciting new technologies that are growing in maybe in an academic context, and to cultivate them for moving into clinical trials, and hopefully partnering with industry for funding clinical studies and FDA approval. And so there's a model the NIH has developed as kind of a resource center where projects, it's like a hands-on SBIR program where you've got experts who are knowledgeable of all aspects of commercializing technology like this. They work with the inventor really early on. So they're not wasting a lot of time doing an animal study that's not going to get them anywhere in terms of getting that investment that's going to require to get past that valley of death. So if we can build communities that help these young entrepreneurs with these ideas really crystal clear, identify a clinical question, work with clinicians who are knowledgeable in that area, think about things like regulatory scale up, and have a story that they can tell to investors and partners to move it along. That would be really valuable, because I think academics don't get it. They don't understand that part of it. They understand the technology and maybe putting something in a rat, but actually getting it into the patient, a lot of times that's outside their sweet spot.
So, and considering where we are now, how long do you think it will take to develop this type of technology and the data behind it to validate it? Will we be able to accomplish that by 2037?
Well, before the conference, I would have said no. I think the reality is we're a whole lot further down the road than people like me realize. So I, as a clinician, what I see clinically is wearable sensors and step counts. And I don't want to offend anybody in the room. I really don't care about step counts, unless it correlates directly to actionable information. So we have to close this loop on data. So I would tell you, will we get there in 15 years? We should. And how it's going to change my practice is to have actionable, objective data in the operating room that directly correlates to patient outcome. But to do that, you have to, achieve objective data in the operating room, and you have to have objective data after. So it's really that link that Dr. Beanie was talking about earlier. It has to be a closed-loop system. And yes, what I have heard already at this conference is we can close the loop, but we don't have enough people talking about the entire loop cycle. We're talking about this loop cycle and this. We have to link it up.
Yeah, and I think NIH also recognizes the challenge is having enough data. Another point that was raised earlier, and there's programs now to generate large data sets that are publicly available. They're AI, ML friendly, so that people can have access to it. So I mentioned over the next 5 years, there are going to be thousands of data sets that include biomechanics, but then also include biomarkers, blood, saliva, stool samples, et cetera. They can then be looked at together in ways that are using fair principles. So I think having those data is going to be really the missing link that we have the tools now, and maybe there's clinical insight, but we really need the data sets to really piece this together.
Perfect. You can see some of the results here. I see that you are moderately enthusiastic. We haven't convinced you to jump into the sensor world. But, maybe we will. But let's see also who is the winner among these three. There you go. Osteosurface Electronics has the awardee. I want to thank you, my panelists, Jeff, Corey, and Lee. You stay here. We'll move to the next session.
You're awesome.
Okay, so next session is on AR, VR, XR. We have listened and hear a lot about it. With us today is Sigurd Berven from UCSF and one of the maximum experts on XR and VR, Luis Rosenberg. Thank you for being with us. Come on in. So Sigurd, you want to say a couple of words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Sigurd Berven. I'm one of the spine surgeons at UCSF. We've got a big interdisciplinary spine group that includes non-operative care, neurosurgery, and orthopedic surgery. And we've done a lot of work with image guidance in our surgeries and really trialed some pretty advanced techniques that include augmented reality and some of the technologies we'll talk about.
Perfect. Luis.
I am Luis Rosenberg. I've been involved in virtual reality and augmented reality for over 30 years now. Started in 1991 at Stanford and NASA, and then the U.S. Air Force. And then in 1993, I founded one of the early virtual reality companies, Immersion Corporation, which I ran for over a decade. And then in 2004, I founded an augmented reality company called Outland Research. And right now, I'm the CEO of an artificial intelligence company called Unanimous AI.
Perfect. Okay, let's get to it. First paper. A trauma patient care simulation using extended reality technology in the hybrid emergency room system. Sigurd, comment on it.
Yeah, so just briefly as a summary for those who hadn't read this, this is an idea of a hybrid emergency room system. So a HERS system which has got a CT scanner and essentially does a whole body CT in about 45 seconds. And this gives the opportunity to have real-time angiography, real-time assessment of intra-abdominal injuries, chest injuries, and actually a superimposition of some of the bony anatomy with some of the soft tissue anatomy. And so in this setting, or in this system, there's the opportunity for multiple disciplines being in the ER room at the exact same time. So you might have a cardiologist, a surgeon, an interventional radiologist, ER specialists, all there together, getting data simultaneously. So I thought that this was a terrific simulation. They showed in the paper that they gave a simulation of 33-year-olds who had jumped 7 stories and had massive intra-abdominal injuries, including vascular injuries. And in the simulation, they actually showed that they were able to more accurately assess the quantity of blood flow, and that the triage of the procedures between an intra-aortic balloon pump, an occlusion procedure, orthopedic procedures, that the way they triage those procedures was actually done differently with the information that this HERS system gave them than they would have done it in the absence of that information. And very specifically, they actually addressed the renal vessel rather than one of the mesenteric vessels, because they were more accurately able to assess the amount of bleeding from that renal vessel. And they hypothesized that this might actually have a major impact on mortality. And in general, the adoption of this type of technology in emergency rooms, there is some early evidence to suggest that this reduces mortality.
Perfect. Louis.
Yeah, no, so I thought this was a great example of augmented reality. And so the way this system worked is they would take the real-time CT scan, and then they would allow the doctors, and all of the surgeons were wearing augmented reality headsets, allow them to basically have X-ray vision in real time. So, and this was a study, so they actually used a mannequin in their simulation, but it was a mannequin. All the doctors are standing around the mannequin with augmented reality glasses, and they can see the medical imaging in real time in the exact location, co-located with the body parts of the mannequin. So they're basically looking into the patient's body in real time. And what's to me was most exciting about this this example was that all of the doctors had the headsets. So they were looking at the same thing, but they were looking at it from their own perspectives. So they were standing where they would normally be standing, looking at the same image, able to have a conversation about it, able to point at things, able to do planning in real time around the same three-dimensional image between them. And you can compare that to if they had to be looking at an image on a screen, everybody looking at the screen, looking back at the patient, trying to do those mental transformations in their head, and they're all making different mental transformations because they're standing on opposite sides. This gets rid of all of that, and so it really shows that this is the way medical imaging should be. In 10, you think of 2037, we'll look back at a time when people actually had to turn and look at a screen to see information, and it's not just right there, co-located with the patient. We'll think that that's primitive, but that is the direction that we're headed. It's a great example, and the participants in this study found it to be very usable and worked well for them.
Thank you.
So yeah, this is was incredible technology. It was fun to read this very short synopsis and then try to visualize what it would be like in that operating room with this multi-trauma patient. I love how they detailed very specific applications and identified vascular injuries that perhaps would not have picked up otherwise. So I want to break this down to the practical. You know, what is the cost for something like this? And based on the cost, or just the and maybe Louis, you can explain what it looks like in the OR, how much area it takes up, et cetera. How practical is this to put it into a community hospital, for example?
So this particular example is one where the level of registration between the imagery and the patient doesn't have to be super precise. It's informational to the doctors. It's allowing them to have conversations about it, and that's really the expensive part of it. And so if you don't have to have super precise, and we'll talk about some papers where you do, it's not expensive, and it's using hardware that's getting less and less expensive very, very quickly. I mean, right now we're talking about headsets that are on the order of thousands of dollars, which is still not a lot. And 5 years from now, we'll be talking about headsets that are hundreds of dollars. So it is, we are now in a period of rapid trajectory of this technology getting cheaper because consumer grade products will be coming out in high volumes, and that will just bring down the price of all the technologies.
I think in the paper they suggest about $150 per case was the incremental cost that they had estimated in using this. What I'm interested in with this technology, because it's a great simulation and great to have information, we're not switching from a screen that shows the CT only to a screen that shows, or CT to chest only, CT to abdomen, you get the whole body on it. But what I'm interested in is how accurate this would be for actually doing an embolization. They didn't really address that because at some point you'd have to have some type of a fiducial on there to actually localize the patient. So I'm not sure whether or not this hologram would be very useful for actually doing the procedures. They had hypothesized it might be, but I think there's a couple steps that would need to be done before this actually became useful for anything other than gathering information, which I think is certainly useful for every specialty in a room to have the same information is useful, but to actually do procedures, I don't think it's anywhere near there yet.
Perfect. Let's switch to the second paper. Clinical accuracy and initial experience with augmented reality assisted pedicle screw placement. So the objective of this paper was to perform a retrospective review of the first 28 consecutive patients who underwent AR-assisted pedicle screw placement in the thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. Sigurd.
Sure, happy to start. So this is a test of a system that's called the Augmented system. We've actually trialed this at UCSF as well. This is a head-mounted camera that gives an augmented reality image. It's a see-through type of platform, so rather than a video assisted platform or a video see-through, it's actually a direct see-through. So we don't have to look at a screen. We can look directly at the patient. We have information superimposed. It's, again, a head-mounted system. So 3 different centers. It was Hopkins, Jefferson, and Washington University St. Louis. They did 28 consecutive patients. They actually enrolled 32, but 4 patients there were technical problems with. They did an intraoperative CT. In one case, you couldn't get the CT to actually register. In 2 other cases, the body habitus of the patient, they couldn't get the fiducial to sit properly. So there were some technical problems that we actually didn't have quite that high a rate of technical problems in our experience with this. The screw accuracy was pretty good. Right now we're expecting in freehand placement, about 93% of our screws would be within 2 millimeters of accuracy. In their case, they had hit 98%, which is a little bit better than recorded rates for freehand. Interestingly, robotic accuracy is actually the least accurate, about 91% with robotic accuracy. So this was a early experience from 3 different centers that showed 98% accuracy. So it showed basically a linear error of about 2 millimeters and an angular error of about 2 degrees. And those numbers are worth looking at we'll talk about for the next paper. But those are numbers that are consistent with other technologies right now.
Louis.
Yeah, so I thought this was also another really good example of augmented reality application. The last paper we're talking about giving X-ray vision. In this case, it's giving additional cues, navigational cues to the doctors so that they can find places, find the placement locations. And so it's like giving a superpower to the doctors, where instead of having to, again, look at different screens and do things completely freehand, it's giving information that is allowing the placement of these targets. And remarkably, this was a freehand process, and with this data, it still was highly accurate. And I think, again, it goes to the idea that we're getting better and better at registering this 3D volumetric overlays to the actual patient. In this case, the registration was done with physical markers attached to the patient, but they were able to get very high accuracy. And I personally think that this just general idea of providing assistive navigational information, even abstract information that allows careful placement in real time without having to look away, without having to change your attention, without having to reorient yourself. I think that's just a general trend across many different applications.
It's an interesting trend that you're pointing out. So you call this freehand because it's an augmented reality assisted platform, so it's a navigated platform, and you're calling that freehand. It shows just a generational shift because freehand to me is no navigation at all, right? And that's what the standard was when I said 93%. Now, if we don't use a robot, if we're only using augmented reality as freehand, right?
Right.
I was wondering, I didn't get this from reading the article, but would this add additional time to the surgery? And how much, or did it save time?
So I could address that a little bit. They didn't, as you say, didn't address it in the article. They did address the cost issue, which we could get to. But in terms of time, right now, the addition of time for the way they did this, they did an intraoperative spin with the arm, had to have a fiducial on for the spin, and that certainly costs time. And that's typically, that could be as much as 12 to 15 minutes. So if you're going T10, S1, that might be 2 or even 3 spins. So that could be 15 or even 20 minutes to actually get the images in the operating room. But then there is some time saving with regard to per screw. You can generally be a little bit faster with the addition of the augmented reality. One of the things they did point out was cost, and the estimated cost for this is about $1,500 per case, which is sort of an interesting number by comparison to the hologram, which was $150 per case in the emergency room, that this would be 10 times as much, which it seemed a little bit much as an estimate. I was a little bit surprised by that number. It's $150,000 for the system, and with disposables and cameras, about $1,500 per case.
Okay, let's move to the next one. Head-mounted augmented reality platform for markerless orthopedic navigation. This is to develop an HMD-based AR navigation platform to support both video see-through and optical see-through modes.
So this is a super technical article, and for those of you who really want to look into some information about the AR headsets, the RGBD cameras, and how they communicate with one another, then I recommend this. I think, Fabrizio, if you had said that there was math involved, I might not have volunteered, or I might not have graded this one quite as highly. But actually, there's some really useful information about here. What they did is they had an accuracy of ephemeral drilling, so creating an osteochondral defect, and how accurate is the drill alignment in creating that defect. What was interesting to me about this was that it wasn't terribly accurate at all, as despite the incredibly sophisticated technology, a real-time camera, it was about 7 millimeters of both angular or linear deviation and 7 degrees, or I think 6 degrees of angular deviation. So much less accurate than the augmetic system was in the spine. So while this seems to be a technology that could be quite interesting in terms of actually wearing a camera and being able to be markerless, what I love about this is not actually having to have a fiducial, right? They really emphasize the cost of a fiducial. If we're going to look at drilling femur, putting a pin somewhere distal to where we're working, that pin getting moved during surgery, the perhaps extra incision and maybe some morbidity that might be associated with this. Everybody loves the idea of being markerless. But in this instance, the accuracy, I think, was really quite compromised. I think there are some technologies that are doing that better, though.
Luis?
Yeah, I thought this was an exciting paper that I think it's early in the development of this technology, but clearly they're addressing one of the big issues with augmented reality in all fields where you're trying to register the virtual image and a real object. One way to do it is with markers. Obviously, in this case, the markers go to patients, which becomes expensive and time-consuming. And the other problem with the markers is that you can't obscure the marker, and so now it puts constraints, line-of-sight constraints, in your space. And so they took a completely different approach, which is to say they could save time and money and effort and reduce constraints if they could get rid of the markers and use a camera to actually do it in real time with deep learning. And so they're taking real-time images of the patient and with deep learning registering the virtual image to the real image. It's not as accurate, but it's actually remarkably accurate when you consider how they're doing it. So they're doing it with a relatively low-cost camera and some sophisticated software, and they're getting pretty close. And so I would say if we're looking, 10 to 15 years out, this is the way it will be done. I feel confident that the technology will improve to a point where you don't need these other extra steps of physical markers that are affixed, but can do it all optically.
It's really clear that what needs to happen is better accuracy, perhaps seeing less of the bone. They didn't really specify how much of the femur you needed to actually see, but that's the real challenge, especially, for example, an anterior approach to the hip or a deeper incision. How much bone can you see, a spine incision, for example? And again, the accuracy being off, I think probably indicates some problems with the fact that it's a virtual image and there's sort of 2 steps removed, right?
It was an interesting article. It was incredibly technical. A lot of acronyms that were, after a while, got lost trying to follow the alphabet soup. But it had one take-home message, and that was the advantages that markerless navigation will provide versus drilling, et cetera. And the question here is how long, and I think, Louis, you did address this to a degree. You might want to talk a little bit more about that. How long will it take to really perfect that?
I mean, I would say that within 5 years, maybe 10 years. I mean, it's completely software solution. So there aren't hardware barriers to it. It's really about the deep learning, the image analysis. It's improving quickly. They've, from a technologist perspective, and I know from a medical perspective, you might look and say, oh, the accuracy is bad. From a technologist perspective, it's actually pretty amazing how how accurate they got, and they're really just starting. So I would be surprised if within 5 years they're not fully within the range of other methods in terms of accuracy.
The other major limitation that needs to be improved is time of it, right? So using the optical see-through technique, it took about 15 seconds to actually get this, get the orientation. And it was actually fully almost a minute using the video to see. That's a minute in the operating room is an eternity.
Well, so looking forward, in 15 years in the future, I'm going to suggest, and you can comment on this, that the limiting factor in the adoption of these technologies is really how the system is going to adjust to it. How are we going to train surgeons? How are we going to be able to apply this and have it placed in hospital systems that is affordable? So what are the obstacles that have to be overcome, particularly in training physicians to adopt this technology?
Maybe I'll start in terms of what are some of the obstacles. And I don't know what movie that picture's from, but you need to have somebody on the surgical staff who's willing to really be the person who suffers through a learning curve, right? And every hospital's got to have somebody who goes through training in radiology technicians, who goes through the early inefficiencies of that. And at UCSF, we certainly went through that learning curve, but there's always going to be a bit of a learning curve, and adopting any new technology initially slows things down, and there are accuracy problems early on. So I think overcoming that is going to be a major barrier. Is the time for some of this in terms of capturing an image, being able to actually in real time use that image to guide a procedure, something that right now is for many of these technologies that we saw a little bit too slow, and obviously the accuracy's got to be somehow better than what we're doing as an index.
I think there's 2 issues. There's the workflow, especially when you have to capture imagery, and that I can't speak to. On the other side of it is the usability, the expectation of users, the surgeons, when they're using augmented reality headsets. I think ultimately it will take very little training, and I think it actually will take very little motivation, because the expectations will change pretty quickly over the next 10 years. Right now we're in a world where we expect digital content to be restricted on a screen, and we have to go to the screen and look at that content. And I think 10 years from now, we'll be in a world where we expect the content to be at the location we want it to be, placed there with augmented reality. And as culture changes, it's going to change for everybody's profession. They're going to want those benefits in certainly in the operating room, but in countless other professions where right now you have to continually look away from what you're doing to digital content and then reorient yourself. And augmented reality is going to solve that.
Another driver for this, so not a barrier, but a driver, is the fact that there's much less tolerance for error. So if you miss a pedicle screw, for example, and there's very little tolerance for that right now.
All right, so we're wrapping up. Can we have Slido on? Perfect. Okay, so we did a little better to intrigue you in this AR and XR. We'll see how we do with the papers. Can we go, move on? All right, nice. So we got your attention. That's fantastic. I'm very happy. All right, XR-based hybrid patient care is the winner. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Do we love science? I love science. I think Bill Nye, I think he would be very proud of you, Fabrizio. We talk a lot about these different technologies, and we talk about them in distinct buckets. But it's not until they actually come together and they show up in your pocket or on your wrist or in your workplace where we actually get to see how this is all going to work together. All right? And so in order then to paint that story, we actually had a video made a year ago working with a company called Soul Machines. And what they're specifically really good at is helping us to understand digital humans and how all of these technologies, when we think about mixed reality, augmented reality, chatbots, sensors, robotics, how all of those things come together to help us have care that we're going to have in 2037. So why don't we roll this video?
Oh, this is Sol, Dr. Beanie's assistant.
Hello, Sol. This is Tyler. I wanted to ask you about my recent surgery.
Hey, Tyler. I see that you had a total knee replacement 5 days ago with Dr. Beanie. I have access to your records and can help you with any questions you may have.
Thank you, Sol. First, I don't remember what they found at surgery. I was a little out of it.
No worries. I just read your operative report and reviewed the visual records from the operating room. You had exposed bone on both sides of the joint and a torn meniscus. These are both considered excellent indications for surgery, so you can expect very good resolution of your symptoms.
That's great. The live XR was kind of cool. So, I'm glad it was correct. Also, the drone delivery with my medications arrived just as I got home, but I can't remember which pills to take or when. Can you tell me?
Yes, of course. The discharge summary states that you should take the pain medicine about 20 minutes before you put on your headset for your virtual reality meditation therapy.
And my leg, it's a little swollen as well. Should I be concerned?
First, let's run a thermal scan.
You have my permission.
Thank you. Voice print activation enabled. According to the scan, the skin surface temperature and tensile grade is not suggestive of any complication of a clot in your leg.
Okay, well that's super helpful, Sol. I feel much better.
Yes, I can see and hear that. Your anxiety measures dropped 7 points.
That's so cool how you can just see that. What else did you find?
You were a little behind on your knee flexion goals compared to other people your age and gender at this time in their recovery. You only achieved 100 degrees of knee flexion and are not putting enough weight on your operated leg.
Well, what do you think I should do about that?
I will send your results to Dr. Beanie's office, as you might benefit from in-person physical therapy. I can arrange an automated insurance approval for the treatment.
Okay, well that makes sense. You have my permission. In the meantime, what should I do for exercise?
Voice print activation enabled. I sent the referral request and it was approved. We can review the exercises you should be doing, and if you can put on your rehab sensor shoes, I can help verbally guide your exercises.
Well, I like the idea, Sol, but can we do it a little later?
Of course. I'll reach out at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning.
You're kidding me, right? I'm supposed to be resting, remember?
Okay, fine. How does 9 o'clock sound?
That's much better.
Great. I scanned your home and see that you have a connected coffee maker. I'll set coffee to brew at 8:45.
Well, thank you.
I love that interaction. Like, 7 o'clock? Seriously? Yeah, that would be my reaction. So anyway, so in this section where we've got two really interesting presentations for you. Intel, largest manufacturer of semiconductor chips across the globe, and they touch pretty much every technology vertical out there. But to help us understand how this tech-driven transformation is happening in healthcare, we are very fortunate to have their global lead with us here today to help us understand this transformation. And I have to tell you, I've gotten to know him over the last year or so, and he has this very calm demeanor, and he has a dogged interest in the emerging technologies, and he's been working a lot on how we're improving imaging. But I want you to know he comes with this very cool, calm exterior, but underneath, this guy is a rocker at heart. And I mean, truly, if he had his bass guitar here with us and his dirt bike, we would see what it's really like under there. So please welcome to the stage, Alex Flores.
Are any of you asking yourselves, what does Intel do in healthcare? Got a couple of nods, yep, I get that very often. So essentially, we play a very unique role across the healthcare ecosystem. What we do is we partner and look for ways on how technology can be used to solve some of the industry's most challenging problems. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for that. I'd like to start off by sharing with you my most recent doctor's visit with my primary care doctor. So back in December, I called my primary care doctor's office and I scheduled my annual physical. At that point, when I talked to the scheduling department, they said to me, I said to them, I'd like to schedule my annual physical and I'd also like to schedule blood work. And at that point, they said, well, you need to talk to your doctor during your visit to get that blood work scheduled. And I thought to myself, that's kind of strange for a couple of reasons. First one is, if they're able to squeeze me in, aren't I creating some bottlenecks within the lab? And the second thing is, so if I can't get my lab work done, that means I got to schedule another appointment, I got to drive in 30 minutes into the office, fast and so forth. But I said, okay, that's fine. So fast forward to February, walk into my primary care doctor's office, usual day, sit down, check in, get handed a paper clip, fill in my paperwork. About 10 minutes later, get called back in. Then my doctor walks in and she confirms I'm here for my physical. And at that point, she also says to me, or I ask her, is it okay if I get my lab work? And she looks at me kind of puzzled and she says, well, didn't you schedule that when you called in? And I said, I did, but they told me that I needed to talk to you first. So at that point, she looked pretty visibly frustrated. She got up, she said, okay, hold on for a second. She got up, walked out of the office, went across the hall into the lab. A couple of minutes later, she shows up, she says, okay, I was able to squeeze you in. So then she pulls out some paperwork and we go through the, what labs I need to get done and so forth. So at that point, I estimate, we wasted maybe about 3 to 5 minutes. I'm thinking to myself, that's okay, we'll get through this. So, we get through the appointment and everything, and then, we're wrapping up, and I ask her, oh, by the way, would it be possible if I can review my latest x-ray scans for my back that I did back in December? She said, sure. So she pulls out her paper folder, starts ruffling through, different papers, and she says, aha, here it is, I found it. So she looks at it more closely, and she realizes it's my x-ray for my shoulder that I did over a year ago. So at that point, she's visibly frustrated. She puts it back in, starts looking again, and she realizes she can't find it. So then she looks at me and she says, I really hate it when the imaging center does not follow up and provide, information from my patients. So at that point, she's visibly frustrated. She pulls out her laptop and then she logs into the imaging center, spends a couple of times, she's able to find my file, and then we review it. So at that point, I estimated we wasted a good 8 to 10 minutes. And I'm thinking to myself, two things. First one is this typical of her day? Does it just snowball from here? And then the second thing is I'm thinking to myself, that's 8 to 10 minutes that I could have had some really good dialogue with my doctor about the state of my health. So fast forward, and 4 things that I want to kind of highlight here during my visit. The first one was analog practices. Lots of examples of that, me physically calling in, me doing some paperwork when I check in. Second one is silo data. My doctor did not have access, readily available access to my latest scans. The third one was around workflow and efficiencies. Again, I'd estimated a good 8 to 10 minutes of wasted time that took away from me having meaningful conversations with my doctor. And then finally, the patient experience. You know, sitting there, watching her kind of go through this, being frustrated, and again, not taken away from the ability to have that dialogue with my doctor. So let's project how this could look in the future. First thing is, I want to give some examples of technology that's available today and what could happen if it's infused, and also kind of project some future technologies as well. First one is around workflow efficiencies. I have a specialist that I see that works for a major research hospital in the Phoenix area. And when I use their app, it is completely seamless. So I can schedule appointments, I can do all my paperwork electronically, I can have dialogue between the nurse and the doctor, and I can have all of my information readily available. Again, this is technology that's available today. Second one is around data. In this case, access to my latest scans. There's technologies available today where I can share my latest scans via QR code on my phone. If I had that technology and my doctor had that, my doctor could have seen my scans within 30 seconds. But also projecting that in the future where we're using secure federated data that not only allows me to share my data seamlessly, all my electronic health records seamlessly across my entire healthcare ecosystem, but in the future, it'll allow me to opt into different studies that without actually having to disclose my personal information. And in this scenario, it can also benefit the different studies that are out there because I'm giving them more data. Finally, looking at more virtualized care. Lots and lots of examples of different technology that really is going to enable more collaboration between different doctors, between my primary care doctor and my other doctors and so forth. And then finally, empowered patients. There's a significant portion of the population today that wants to be more engaged in their healthcare. They want to be more educated, not only on their current state of healthcare, but where it's going. One example is digital twins. Implementing that digital twin so that you have a roadmap of what your health is going to look like in the future, and what are the steps that you can take now to potentially change that. Now what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the shift. And the shift that I feel the industry needs to really kind of embrace in order to propel us in the future. First thing I'd like to say is data. It's estimated that roughly 30% of the world's data is generated in the healthcare industry. It's also estimated that roughly only 3% of that data is turned into actionable insights. When Dr. Kraft gave his talk yesterday, he was, projecting all the different technology that's going to be implemented. The thing that was going through my mind is more and more and more data. Data that's going to have to be generated, analyzed, transported. So what we need to do is move from an abundance of unused data to where we have that insights driven by data. Again, through the implementation of different technologies that we've seen throughout this last day and a half that'll provide us those insights. The second one is moving from what I call current state, where as patients, oftentimes we sit with our doctor and it's a one-way conversation where we're listening, we're implementing what they say, but it's not necessarily always two-way. To going towards a model where we become more empowered consumers of healthcare, We've seen this in other industries, specifically retail, where consumers have really demanded change in that industry. They've demanded that things become more immersive, that their shopping experience is more connected with the store and with their online experience. Siloed productivity. Again, oftentimes when I have conversations with my primary care doctor, they're not shared with any of my specialists. So how do you build that value creation where you can build that collaboration across the entire ecosystem? And then finally, moving away from this focus of a current state. So my example when I was talking to my primary care doctor was really focused on the state of my health today. Lab work looks great. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's talk about your back. Hopefully I'll see you next year. To a model where we can experiment, learn, and project that ultimately gives me a better understanding of where my health is going in the future and me, what I can do personally to change that. For technology superpowers, Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger often talks about the 4 technology superpowers as how they're enabling digital transformation across multiple industries. We're seeing this in retail, industrial, automotive, financial, and we're also seeing it in healthcare, as you've seen many examples today and yesterday. First one is artificial intelligence. Obviously, a lot of examples happening. If anything, we'd like to see artificial intelligence as assisted intelligence in healthcare, because ultimately what it's really used for is to allow clinicians to focus on their most difficult problems. Second is pervasive connectivity, having that connectivity anytime, anywhere, coupled with the ability to have that ubiquitous compute, whether it's at the edge, whether it's at a rural clinic, whether it's at the pharmacy, whether it's at the home. And then having the cloud to edge infrastructure, the underpinnings of technology that ultimately allows all of that data to not only be generated, but to be transported, analyzed, and stored. Before I move on to my next section, there's one thing that I do want to leave with everyone. And it's really, in relation to the shift that needs to happen in this industry in order for us to truly embrace that digital transformation. Albert Einstein has a great quote. It says, "We cannot solve problems by using the same thinking we used when we created them." This is very powerful because in order for us to really embrace where we need to go in the future, we have to change our mindsets. Now what I'd like to do is give you 3 examples of digital innovation that's happening today in the industry and where it's going to be driving us in the future. First one is Care Syntax. Care Syntax is a company that that Intel has invested in the past through our capital group. And they're an excellent example of how they've utilized 4 technology superpowers. This is a great example of, they've created a digital surgery platform that analyzes data from video, images, devices, and different clinical systems. And it's used to deliver predictive insights in the operating room. So if you look at it, what they're doing is they're using artificial intelligence, they're using connectivity, they're using the compute at the edge, and ultimately that cloud to edge infrastructure that delivers all of this data. And their goal here is to reduce variability in surgeries while improving workflows. This next example is from Proximie. So recently Intel held a joint action meeting, and the CEO of Proximie was there, and she was talking about her company, and essentially what it is, it's a technology platform that allows clinicians to virtually scrub into any operating room anywhere in the world. And again, another example of connectivity of that edge to cloud compute. This allows clinicians to virtually engage live during an operation. They can collaborate real time. Things like pinpointing where the incision goes, talking about different techniques and so forth. And then what they can do is they can also store the session, the video later, and it can be used as an educational tool, also a collaboration tool in terms of reviewing what they did and so forth. This last example is really interesting for me because it shows the power of collaboration between two industries. So Magic Leap is a company that developed a very immersive platform that's used for augmented reality, and they were focused on the gaming industry. BrainLab partnered with Magic Leap, and what they did is they created these surgical goggles that allows clinicians to digitally immerse themselves and help prepare for some very complex surgeries. In this case, we have an example here of two surgeons from the UC Davis Medical Center that use this technology to better prepare for a very complex surgery where they had to separate two twins that were joined at the head. So they used the goggles to immerse themselves into the different 3D scans of the brain to really try to focus and prepare as best they could for this complex surgery. So I'd like to summarize and leave you with 3 key points. First one is everything starts with the patient journey. I mentioned to you how my most recent experience was really just, it left me wanting more because I wanted to have more conversations with my doctor. Technology can really be an enabler to allow us to have those meaningful conversations, to allow us to focus on what's most important. I introduced to you the 4 technology superpowers as enablers. Again, these are enablers in terms of driving the digital transformation that our industry needs to move forward. And I've also showed you when combining that with different examples from other industries, it can be even more powerful in terms of accelerating where we need to go. And then finally, gave you 3 small examples of some innovation that's happening today that's really kind of accelerating us where we need to go in the future. Again, these are just 3 small examples that are utilizing the technology superpowers that will ultimately allow us to transform as an industry. I'd just like to leave you with this. What technology superpowers do you think are going to help you enable you to get where you need to go in your practice and in the conversations with your patients? Thank you.
Okay, let's trade here. Couple questions for you.
Yes.
Are you going to be in trouble with Mr. Pat Geisinger? All along the bottom it said confidential intel. Just wanted to check.
You can ignore that.
Good. How's your shoulder?
I have a torn rotator cuff, but I'm doing everything I can to avoid surgery because
I know a few people who could help.
I'm sure you do.
Okay, yeah, so, all right. When you asked about those superpowers and you talked about how everything starts with the patient's journey, what would you think if we talked about everything starts actually with the provider's journey? To make sure that it's fun to do this work so that it's fun to have that patient experience. You had that experience where you saw the clinician say to you, the frustration.
Yes.
So when we put the patient's journey there, where do you put the provider?
That is a really good question because
I'm good at that.
Yes,
Yeah.
You're very good at that. And I think what's interesting about that too is there's so much more challenges now with the providers, specifically around the workage shortage, that's why a lot of these tools need to understand how they can actually benefit them in terms of whether it's reducing some of the clinical workflow overload that they have, whether it's reducing the number of screens that they have to look for, or just helping them automate some of their job so that they can really focus on what they're passionate about, and ultimately that's the patient.
And what does Intel need from this community so that you can be developing better technologies, better devices, hardware, better partnerships? What can we do for you?
Just more engagement. A lot of times we work with medical device manufacturers, but we don't get a lot of feedback from the actual clinicians themselves. So we see this as a perfect opportunity to get that feedback, to really understand what are the challenges that you're seeing and how technology can help alleviate some of those.
So beyond feedback, do you want partnerships? What else?
Feedback, partnerships, anything that we can do to engage further.
Okay, you got it then. So you know who to contact. This guy is in charge of the healthcare vertical at Intel. You're the guy.
Yes,
All
I'm
right.
the guy.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. So our next presentation, I'm pleased to tell you that he does not have COVID. He is not COVID positive, but he does live across the pond. And so the next presentation that we're going to look at is going to help us understand a little bit more about the possibilities of what the metaverse, what the hospital experience might look like in the metaverse. So the presentation is going to be given by Dr. Shafi Ahmed. He is a surgeon. He's a futurist. He's an innovator. He is an entrepreneur. He's a humanitarian, and his journey into being an early adopter and experimenter with a lot of the virtual reality technologies came as a result of recognizing there are so many places where there are not surgeons, and there are not places and pathways to train surgeons. His very first company that he created was called Virtual Realities, and the problem that he was setting out to solve was, how are we going to train the next generations of thousands of surgeons and make sure that they're in the different parts of the world where they need to be in order to make sure that people have safer surgeries in the places that they call home? So with that, let's go ahead and roll this presentation.
Reimagine. Rethink. Rewire. Reactivate. Reboot.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, of course, for the DOCSF conference in San Francisco. Thanks to my wonderful dear friend, Professor Stefano Bini, for inviting me again to speak at this conference. I was here about 3 or 4 years ago, face-to-face live with the audience, which I thoroughly enjoyed. This time, sadly, I can't be with you, so I'm here now virtually, which is, of course, the name of the presentation almost, and we're talking about virtual reality, augmented reality, and of course, the metaverse. So what is this hype all about at the moment? Let's go back to 1992. You've heard of Snow Crash, presumably from an author called Neil Stephenson. In 1992, he described the city of LA in terms of being disrupted and being challenged by the big tech companies. It is becoming a dystopian society. And also, of course, there was a financial meltdown within the book. This allowed people to move away from reality into their metaverse. So that was the term coined back in 1992, a real visionary. And actually what we're seeing now is almost a replication of those two areas of financial meltdown and the world not working as it should do, and a dystopian society we're living in, run by those major tech companies. So actually, maybe it's more real than you may think it is. And of course, as we've seen more recently, the explosion of cinema, with these amazing films called Ready Player One, where people are now depicted into the virtual reality with their headsets, and this whole depiction of this new kind of multiverse that we're seeing in different films now, including Free Guy as these players within games. And gamification has been very largely responsible for the explosion in the concept of the metaverse. We've seen now, of course, that term also being taken by Facebook, who have created a new company called Meta, and their aim, of course, is to create a new society, social connectivity within a virtual reality, augmented reality environment. So what we're seeing is a mix between the physical and the digital world. So basically, the reality is going to converge together. We can seamlessly move from one to the other. We've come a long way in designing the web. If you go back to Tim Berners-Lee, who described the whole concept of Web 1.0, Essentially, he described the URL, the HTTP protocol, and of course, the way that we navigate through simple platforms like Netscape and others through the early browsers. It was simple, it was transfer of knowledge and information. But of course, that was superseded very rapidly by Web 2.0. What's Web 2.0? Well, it's the current internet. It's mainly about social connectivity, user-generated content that can be shared widely, but controlled ultimately by big tech companies or big organizations. We're now moving to what's called Web 3.0, which is controversial at some times. However, it's where society is heading towards. What does it mean? Well, let's look at it more deeply. There's a number of things the Web 3.0 is promising us. First of all, it's going to be decentralized. So it won't be controlled by major companies or major servers. You can be accessing your own information, sharing it with others widely. It's going to be trustless and permissionless. And basically that involves what's called the blockchain, a sense of a ledger that's going to connect it all together and keep it secure for us, but at the same time allowing us to share important data, maybe monetize that data or share our experiences so that we become the owners of all that data. It's going to be underpinned by AI and deep machine learning that we've seen now being exposed in healthcare. Of course, it's about connectivity and ubiquity, access to anybody anywhere around the world. And that's going to be a change in what we have at the moment with Web 2.0. There's a whole concept of virtual reality, augmented reality, and the whole XR that we've been seeing over the last few years. We've described this thing called non-fungible tokens, NFTs. We've seen the marketplace now being swamped with people's NFTs selling images or paintings or graphics, etc. Now we've seen a kind of realization about normalizing what that might mean and perhaps reducing the costs of some of these NFTs as we go forward. Again, that gives an indication of how data might be captured and shared going forward, particularly in healthcare. Talk about semantic web. The web at the moment has no context. You might see some text within the web. What does it mean? Where does it come from? And we're looking at semantic web that puts everything into context, which is much more sophisticated, more intelligent. And of course, the world of avatars and holograms are going to form the basis of our interaction within this world that we're going to be living in fairly soon. So that defines Web 3.0. The other thing I like to say is about connectivity. Smartphones really were the measure of Web 2.0. But for Web 3.0, we need much more connectivity, higher bandwidth, lower latency. And 5G, for me, is going to be one that connects all these devices. It connects all the exponential technologies to create what I say is the Internet of Medical Things. And so Internet of Medical Things is also part of the metaverse that we're describing. And 5G is going to be crucial to that. It's allowed us to reimagine also what's possible. Look at the end of the spectrum here with 5G. We're now looking at cloud computing, edge computing, robotics, immersive AR, VR. We're looking at remote surgery. This whole concept of connecting things within the hospital or community or social care is now going to be exacerbated or supported by these new 5G technologies. It could be 6G in the future, but these connectivity is so crucial to allow us to think about the metaverse. As we go forward, the first thing to think about is replicating yourself. We've heard about digital twins, of course, but we were looking at what does a digital human look like? How do we replicate ourselves in terms of the way we speak, the way we think, perhaps using AI and deep machine learning and voice technology to reproduce ourselves in the future? Or do we replicate ourselves as avatars? So we have a different kind of appearance, if you like, for people in this metaverse. So we've been working on that for a while. This was me actually 6 years ago, excuse me, creating my own digital human. I realized that at some point we had to recreate ourselves. So this is a process called photogrammetry. 105 cameras creating a 3D model of us. So that then becomes our avatar in this world. Actually, what we're seeing now is people like, what's it called? Unreal Engine, creating the meta-human, real life-like appearances of a digital person. We're seeing much more sophisticated methods of creating very quickly a representation of yourself that's physical, but also digital. So actually, this is going to be the way we create ourselves in the future. This was me back about 6 years ago, thinking about how do I create a hologram? And this is working with a company called Double Me around holoportation. They're just now creating a whole concept going forward around the metaverse, and they've been funded by, I think, the South Korean government to 26 million to create their version of the metaverse.
Shafi, have a look at this.
Yeah, let me have a look over your shoulder. Oh yeah, I see what's going on there. I think I can give some advice, Carl. No problems. Thanks.
So that's also a concept of holoportation, which is now coming in more vogue. These are one of the many ideas that we generated to create this kind of that new world that we're describing. This was made during the pandemic. Of course, the pandemic has driven change, driven innovation, allowed us to be more remote, more virtual, and recreating new ways of thinking about work, but also how we train and educate people from around the world. And healthcare is no different. Our interactions change with our patients. We're now more virtual with telephone consults, with telemedicine or total triage happening. So actually what we're seeing here now is this concept. And this is what we did during the pandemic to see where we could describe and teach people around the virus.
Hey, Dr. Ahmed, good to see you again.
Hey, Harrison, so good to see you. Where are you?
I'm in New York. How about you?
I'm in London, so good to see you. I think we've got Ian here as well, haven't we? Hi, Ian.
Hey guys, I'm in downtown Atlanta right now. Thanks for joining me. I forgot my Magic Leap, but I've got my phone handy, so joining you through here.
Thanks for joining us. Should we have a look at some images to help us in this regard? Let's try. I'll just pull up the image of the virus itself, just to show you what it looks like. Is essentially countries across here. These are China, Iran, Italy, and South Korea.
So we're describing a whole area where you can converge and collaborate, remote collaboration, using avatars of yourself. It's a step forward from being on a Zoom call or a Microsoft Teams call, which is a 2D interface. It doesn't allow that almost human interaction, if you like. So this is going to be a segue into having face-to-face. We're going to live in hybrid models, aren't we? From online platforms to this metaverse and then face-to-face. So it gives us more opportunity to collaborate remotely. In Dubai, a few months ago, Arab Health, I launched the concept of the metaversity, which we'll talk about in a moment. But what I did here was collaborate with 8 doctors from around the world connected through either smartphone or a computer, or indeed a head device. This was a HoloLens 2 that we're using at the time.
Around the tissues of the appendix.
Okay. So he's explaining the CT shows a 6 centimeter area of inflammation, and you can see the tip of the appendix. So he's now showing me what the image shows. That's fine. Thanks, Guillermo. Can we get rid of this now? Thank you.
So that was Guillermo from Mexico, a radiologist, who then appeared in my world, telling me about an image that we were struggling with. And imagine this as we do remote MDTs, multi-discipline team meetings remotely. Also, during the pandemic, education was, of course, very difficult in medicine. Students weren't allowed to go to the wards because of the risk of the coronavirus and had to have virtual learning. But we weren't ready for that because we were relying on very much a face-to-face delivery of clinical education. Can we do differently? I've been working for the last 6-7 years using Google Glass, virtual reality, social media to teach people on a global level. So during the pandemic, it's very easy for me to pick up a HoloLens, connect through remote assist, and train people remotely. And so we did this about doing remote clinical ward rounds to our students in the lecture theatre next door at Barts, the medical school. This is a lecture theatre. We brought people in, or students in, social distanced them. So 70 seats only, with a capacity of 400 seats actually. I was on the ward doing a ward round. They were connected to me by a moderator and through my HoloLens.
Anastomosis. And so what's happened is that sometimes with this staple line by the pancreas, you get leaking of fluid, the pancreatic fluid, and that's what you're seeing.
So what we're seeing now is how do we change the model of education, offering more support, more opportunities, if you like. So in fact, our university, when I was teaching, was one of the first to embrace the metaverse or VR collaborative tools. And actually now I'm running courses at the university, both at Imperial and at Barts, Queen Mary University London, running entire courses in the metaverse. And we're trying to find out what that means. And that led to me to think about actually, can we do better? Can we create a metaversity, a new concept, the next frontier in virtual education? And you can read all about it at metaversity.org, and we've launched this over the last few weeks. So what does that mean? Well, what we're trying to create is to, what's that, reimagine the current education paradigm by creating an equitable opportunity in a decentralized mecha ecosystem. So it's creating that Web 3.0, but for education purposes. Because I think that's a model that we can be looking forward to add value to our education portfolio. So that's what we've been doing. And what we've been creating is different worlds for education, for learning, for health. And I'll show you what we mean by that. This is one of our worlds created in ArtSpace VR, where we can now actually just, this is a spaceship flying into a new world. This is for people's well-being, mental health, and for resilience, and to support them during virtually, if you like. So we've thought about how to create this new world. Very different to normal lectures and things. There'll be immersive experiences that allow this whole metaverse to allow it to be more supportive and different to what they're used to. As you navigate, of course, through different worlds within this one here, you can now then look into how you can support somebody. The interaction is important. In the future, we'll have haptic suits, gloves, to be able to support that. This is the metaversity. Again, it's going to be a way of how do we teach people in the metaverse? We're trying to figure it out to get validation and accreditation of courses. Here's our entrance. Here's our May list of lectures that we've been giving. As you can see, we're using color quotation throughout. Now, going into different rooms across the 2 or 3 floors that we've created to be able to talk, to meet, to connect, to have breakout sessions or give lectures or TEDx style talks, for example, in different environments. So creating these worlds is very important in around thinking about how does the future of education look like? And please do follow us on Metaversity and register your interest for courses going forward. The next concept is the healthcare city of the future in the metaverse. And actually, I've been working with AI Medis, a company based out in Germany, who are actually building the world's first healthcare city in the metaverse. And I thought I'd show you what they're creating and what we're going to be doing in the future together.
I'm going to introduce and welcome my dear colleague, Dr. Michael Kaldash.
Hello, Professor Shafi. Thank you so much for joining me here in Ametis Health World. I'm Michael, the CEO and founder of Ametis, and I have created together with my colleagues Ametis Health World, an interactive 3D world where people come together, patients can meet doctors, hospitals and caregivers can get in touch with patients and offer the services and support to patients all around the world.
Michael, this looks gorgeous. Tell me more about this space that you created.
So here you see the entry hall of the virtual university hospital that we've created for one of our partners. And it's the first thing that you see when you enter the hospital. You can take a little bit a look around and can decide where to go and what to do. Okay, let me now show you our world and our vision.
Welcome to Ametis Health World, the world's first medical metaverse, offering unlimited possibilities for doctors, patients, caregivers, and the healthcare industry around the world. Patients can get therapies, consultation, education, and social interaction through the power of virtual reality, anywhere in the world, at any time, on all of their devices. Our virtual hospital chain will incorporate a wide range of services and experiences that seamlessly connect patients to healthcare professionals, as it will be easy as turning on their phone from the comfort of their home to connect to a healthcare professional in another corner of the world.
So you're seeing worlds now being created that look pretty stunning, but can we do better? Obviously, a lot of people use Unity as their platform to create some of these worlds. But now we're seeing Unreal Engine with a new release of Unreal Engine 5, creating visually stunning and photoreal images to create worlds that look so much more realistic. So I'm going to show you a picture or a video, if you like, of the world that we can create as we go forward. And that's what we're doing at AI Medis. So we'd like to invite you to our land sale starting at the end of May. So hopefully we'll be sharing that more widely on social media, and you can buy land within the metaverse and build whatever you decide is appropriate for you. And we've got a lot of interest already from around the world about buying land within our metaverse. And of course, these worlds will be connected. Whether it's Facebook's metaverse in terms of horizons, etc., or Decentraland, or the AI Medis land, they'll be interconnected. So you can go from one to the other. So that whole experience will be hopefully seamless as we go forward. The other question is around, for me, about patient data. Very crucial, of course. And I think the metaverse allows us to actually understand data better and actually use it in a way that we can actually share it more widely, become more transparent, and the ownership lies with the patient or the user. So they can actually even monetize it. I think it's going to disrupt the way we deal with data. So this is an example of what we're thinking of. And AI Medis already have their token, they have the NFT marketplace, and they're figuring out how they can now share that data more widely.
Welcome to Imetis Data Exchange, the world's first medical and scientific NFT marketplace. Imetis Data Exchange, secure and immutable data NFTs monetize and finally mainstream and standardize the multi-trillion-dollar market of medical and scientific data all over the world. Data is the gold of the 21st century. Actually, 30% of all data is health data, and healthcare institutions and companies sit on a treasure of unimaginable value. Up to now, data had to be collected in time-wasting and expensive processes. Entire companies and a large amount of data scientists needed months to collect certain data, while still the quality and reliability were unsafe. Imetis Data Exchange creates a completely new market and opens the world's medical and scientific data with one click to and from hospitals, researchers, pharma, AI companies, space agencies, and the self-driving car industry. Imetis NFTs contain medical, pharmaceutical, research, and socioeconomic data, and can serve as a deed of ownership for space and items in Imetis Health City, the world's first healthcare metaverse. Researchers, pharma, CRO, space agencies, car manufacturers, universities, and governments can buy and sell data directly, while the same parties can fund R&D through Imetis NFTs. Data providers and anyone participating in the process earn a fixed percentage of the data sold each time the NFT is used and/or sold. Each NFT is flawlessly traceable while always keeping the data provider's anonymity at any time. Each NFT is encrypted so that only the data buyer can access the information while guaranteeing the data's authenticity. The Imetis token makes it easier and cheaper to buy and sell data NFTs while offering advantages to institutional AMIX token holders. Trade, rent, and buy items in space in Imetis Health City through Imetis NFTs. Flawless integration into Imetis Health City, the world's first medical metaverse. Participate in big pharmaceutical trials via NFT ownership. Imetis is the future of medical big data. Join now.
So as you can see, I think data will be key as we go forward in defining what that metaverse looks like. But of course, we have to be very cautious around patient confidentiality, around concerns around privacy, etc., and understand patient safety much better. And it's great that XRSI, for example, who's led by Kavya Perman, who you may have heard of, is doing some amazing work on ensuring that we control privacy, that we ensure the safety of our patients by creating this framework And of course, we're working with them in the sense that how to support one another to create those standards across the healthcare system in the metaverse. So, and of course, they really released a couple of reports around what they think is important. And I think that's crucial for us to do in a fashion that's safe for our patients. I'm going to leave you with one last video of the endless possibility. This is a video of a 5G network showing the true possibility of remote collaboration, remote work, and seamlessly going from the physical to the digital world to support healthcare.
Professore, ci siamo. Lasciamo a lei. Grazie, professore. Concludiamo noi.
So we told you it would take you to places that seem, well, you have to suspend belief, right? To suspend belief in what's possible and let yourself consider where technology might take us. And to give us a little context to that and to that journey and the fact that it is ongoing, we have the pleasure to have Louis Rosenberg join us today. If Louis will join us back, and he earlier joined us for the panel, and Dr. Rosenberg, Mr. Rosenberg is actually arguably one of the inventors of augmented reality. The whole concept came out of his lab, and we'll have a conversation about that history to put it in context for us. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm honored, actually, to be here speaking to you. So this is really, really exciting. Actually, I'd love to go back to the early 90s in that lab and give us a little history about how the whole idea of creating these augmented environments came about.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people don't realize it, but virtual reality, the world of virtual reality, in terms of the community and the industry, first started in the late 80s and was very vibrant in the early 90s. So I think the phrase virtual reality was coined in like 87 or 88. And I was a graduate student at Stanford at the time, and I was very interested in this idea of virtual reality. And so I was fortunate enough to guide my doctoral work in that direction. And I was also fortunate enough to work in a VR lab at NASA. There were very few labs at the time, and this was during the very early days, and so I was working on software to model interocular distance, the distance between your eyes, and to optimize depth perception in head-mounted displays and other displays. And I thought virtual reality was amazing. I was very, very excited about it, but I really didn't like wearing the headsets and being cut off from the world around me. I felt like, I knew that the fidelity would get better, the headsets would get smaller, the technology would get better, and I still wasn't sure I would like being cut off from the world around me. It just felt like a visceral reaction. And what I really, as I spent hours, writing code, I really just wanted the power of virtual reality just to be spread all around me, to just be in the world, and the content would just be there as part of my natural world, and I wouldn't be cut off. And so I proposed the idea to the U.S. Air Force, to Air Force Research Laboratory, and they funded me to build what ended up being called the Virtual Fixtures Project, which was really the first functional augmented reality system. And interestingly enough, the thing that got the Air Force excited back then, when I pitched it to them, was the potential for medical application. Right. And so what I said was, imagine if, and this was in 1992, I said, imagine if you were a surgeon and you could look inside of a patient, and imagine if you couldn't just look inside the patient, but you could actually physically feel things. And that's why the project was called the Virtual Fixtures Project, because the concept that I got them excited about was saying, hey, imagine if instead of having to have all these physical fixtures, these physical mechanical things that could help surgeons perform tasks, they could be completely virtual. And so this first system we actually built, the people would wear a full upper body exoskeleton. And so they'd wear this big exoskeleton, and they'd look into a vision system, and they could not just see and hear, but they could feel. And we were back in 1992, 1993, we were able to show that we could enhance people's performance. We could enhance their physical dexterity. We could enhance their skill by 100, 200% by creating these overlays. And so I was convinced that this was useful, and people liked it. But the thing that probably changed my view more than anything was because I was running these experiments on people. People would come in and wear the exoskeleton, and every single one of them would get out of the rig and say, like, this is amazing. One day this is going to be everywhere, and I agreed. And so in 1993, I founded a company called Immersion Corporation, which was one of the early VR companies. And I believed that within 10 years it would be everywhere. I was off by 2 decades, and there were a number of other companies at that time that were off. I mean, in the early 90s, we really thought that we were there. If you looked at the cover of Wired magazine in 1995, there were images of virtual reality was the big thing, and by 2000, we're all going to be in the metaverse, and that didn't happen. That said, I feel like it's real this time. Now we're at a point where the metaverse really is right around the corner, and all the pieces are in place, and all that magic is still that we experienced way back is still there, and even more so. So, as someone who's been faked out multiple times that we're close, I really do believe this time we actually are genuinely close, and all the pieces are there for the metaverse to really change everybody's lives certainly by 2037, but I think that even just 10 years from now, everybody will be spending significant time in these virtual worlds.
So as a way for us to understand what might be future blocks to deployment implementation, where do you think the issues were in the last 20 years? Because you thought by 2000 for sure we're in there, 2010 we still weren't there. What were the technical blocks or the hardware blocks you thought were still critical to get us to where we are today?
So the biggest blocks were cost. And so when I founded Immersion Corporation in 1993, we knew how to do it, and we actually could create really good virtual worlds, but we couldn't do them on a PC, we couldn't do them on a phone, we couldn't do them on a single chip that goes in a headset. We could do them on silicon graphics workstations that cost $60,000, $70,000. And for that reason, the medical industry was actually the first industry to really support virtual reality. And so in 93, 94, 95, at Immersion, we developed some of the very first medical simulators for training doctors in virtual reality for medical schools. And so throughout the 90s, 95 to 2000, we built virtual reality simulators for laparoscopic surgery, endoscopic surgery. We had simulators specifically for bronchoscopy, colonoscopy, angioplasty, other catheter procedures. And for decades, we sold simulators to medical schools. And when that was, we owe the medical field to keep the industry alive, because all of the other parts of it, the consumer drive for VR completely disappeared. By 1997, when people started talking about the internet, nobody wanted to invest in virtual reality anymore. Nobody wanted to push it. And it was the medical space that kept the field alive until the early 2010s. And that's when the industry came back alive again. And so what was the barrier? The barrier was cost. And the thing that really changed everything, in my mind, was the iPhone. The iPhone 2007 was launched, convinced everybody to go from a flip phone to a smartphone, and within 5 years, the cost of the flat panel screens and the cost of the sensors and the cost of the processors came down so much that by the early 2010s, the ability to do head-mounted displays that were much, much higher fidelity, everything much smaller, everything much cheaper, finally materialized. And at the same time, the cellular networks got faster, and so communication speeds. And so it was really the smartphone that drove all those things, drove the costs down, drove the communication speeds up, and then it took another 10 years for the industry to, again, mature. But now it's really at the point where I think it is mature, and it's no longer small companies and startups that are pushing it. It's all the biggest companies in the world. And I think the thing that can convince you that it's going to happen is that the largest companies in the world are investing billions or tens of billions a year with the expectation that the metaverse is going to change their business.
So you've talked about augmented reality as becoming one of a series of layers of information that we'll be consuming, and how they'll become so ingrained in our experience, it'll be very hard to extrapolate ourselves from that. Can you go a little bit into that discussion?
Sure. So, I mean, when we're trying to think out to 2037, how is the metaverse going to affect our life? I think it's worth first saying that I see two different metaverses. I see a virtual metaverse and an augmented metaverse. And the virtual metaverse is a purely virtual world where you're wearing VR headsets.
Like we saw earlier.
Similar to the videos that we saw. Right now they're very cartoony. They'll get better. They'll get photorealistic. That said, I still believe people are not going to want to spend all day in virtual worlds like that. I don't believe people are going to spend all day with big headsets on and being isolated or separated from their natural surroundings. I think people will spend a few hours a day. I think people, professionally will use it for, targeted applications. But I think, for shopping, for socializing, for entertainment, it will be used. It will almost be used at the way people use television, as for limited duration. The augmented metaverse is going to be a world where you're wearing very, very lightweight glasses. It'll get to the point where they don't look very different than just current glasses. And those glasses will bring virtual information into your world. And they'll bring all kinds of magical content. It will embellish the world with artistic and informational things that are everywhere. It will be driven, whereas the virtual metaverse will be driven by the social media companies of today, because they see it as the social environment of the future. The augmented metaverse will be driven by the mobile phone companies of today. I feel pretty confident that Apple and Google and Samsung all realize that in the 2030s, probably by 2030, 2032, we will no longer be thinking about looking down at our phone for information. We'll be thinking about wearing glasses and having it all around us. And in fact, in the 2030s, we'll look back at the days when people were walking down the street with their neck bent, staring at something, and we'll think that that's silly, because it really is. The natural place for all this information to exist is not here. It's to just exist naturally in your world. And so when Apple and Microsoft and Google deploy these technologies and content exists, information exists, I think adoption will happen very quickly, because if you don't have the glasses, you won't access the information. And so it, in theory, would follow an adoption curve that's very similar to going from flip phones to smartphones. At some point, everybody needed a smartphone, even though it cost 10 times more, because you were missing out. And I think going from phones to AR glasses will be the same thing. Within 5 to 10 years of the consumer launch of glasses from, say, Apple, everybody will feel like they need those glasses, or they'll be missing out on information.
Information like the turns on the street, but also you talked about, like, if you're selling something to a customer, It might tell you this is a third-time returning customer. They eat here all the time. Their preferred food is this. It's a remarkable how much information they'll be able to access and project into the field of view that's public.
So information will be everywhere. Information, some of it will be artistic, and some of it will be entertainment, and some of it will be commercial. And in fact, there'll be a lot of commercial information. And that's the part of it that I worry a lot about, which is the metaverse gives the platform providers an absurd amount of power. And they can use that power for amazing things like the hospitals of the future and for art and entertainment of the future, but it will also be used for promotional reasons. And so when you're wearing AR glasses, that means that the platform providers will be able to track everywhere you go and everything you do, and they'll be tracking you as you're walking down the street, and they'll know when you look into a store window, and they'll know how long you spend looking at things and where you speed up and walk past. And so the tracking that we currently experience in social media, which is tracking where you click and who your friends are, that will go to tracking everything about our lives. And I think it's dangerous. I'm pushing very hard for regulation of metaverse platforms because of the amazing amount of data that they'll be able to track. And then they'll also be able to inject things into our world, whether it's a virtual world or an augmented world, just like they do in social media. But the advertisements won't be flat, pop-up ads or videos. The advertisements will be immersive, and so there'll be virtual product placements. You'll be walking down the street and you'll see something, and you might just think it's a natural part of your world, and you might not know that a third party injected that into your world for you to experience as a way to persuade you. And so the ability to market to us in an immersive sense and track us in an immersive sense means that there's dangers of the metaverse. My hope is that we can learn from social media and push to regulate the metaverse, because it does have the potential to make our lives magical, and it makes sense, especially augmented reality. It makes sense for the content to be where you want it, not to be trapped on a screen, if we can make it safe and we can prevent corporations from being able to use all that data.
It's interesting when I first read some of your work, and I'm like, this is not necessarily a wonderful world. It feels very invasive. At the same time, you point out in your article that it's likely that we as humans will make the trade-off to share our data for the additional information we get in the world, because we start to become reliant on information that is now projected into the virtual world to the point that we can't live without it. If you can't live without it, there's this trade-off, which will likely happen because history tells us we tend to do that. And no matter how toxic it may look or seem. We have a couple minutes. This path, this thought path that we just went through leads us naturally to your last endeavor, which is Unanimous AI. We could spend an hour on that, but I think it's worth, and for those who are interested, there's a phenomenal TED Talk that he has on this topic, but can you just give us 2 cents and just get everybody interested in maybe pursuing a little more research in that space?
Sure. So my interest overall is how to use technologies to amplify human abilities, and that's what got me interested in virtual reality and augmented reality, and also artificial intelligence. And so my current company, Unanimous AI, is an artificial intelligence company that really takes a very different approach. Instead of using AI to replace people, which is what a lot of AI research is doing, it uses AI to connect groups of people together and make them smarter. And it is modeled on the biological principle of swarm intelligence, where natural organisms are able to make decisions together that allow them to become a superorganism, to become significantly smarter than the individuals who make them up. And so starting 7 years ago at Unanimous, we said, well, if birds and bees and fish can get smarter together in groups, maybe people can. And so we built a system called Swarm. It allows groups, whether it's small groups or big groups, to come together and make decisions, make predictions, make medical diagnoses together in groups, and we found it works. Nature works. They become significantly smarter. And since this is a medical group, We had an NSF-funded study with Stanford Medical School a couple years ago where we had groups of radiologists diagnose chest x-rays as a swarm. And we said, what would be better? Is it better for them to diagnose by themselves, diagnose together by just taking a vote, or diagnose by working together as a biological swarm? And that just means they log into our software and they answer together in real time. And what the study found that we published with Stanford was that we reduced their diagnostic errors by 36% when they worked together as a swarm. And again, it was a use of AI that was not getting rid of any of the human intelligence. It was just amplifying the human intelligence. And we've done studies with other groups in groups of financial traders can make more accurate financial forecasts. Groups of sports fans can make more accurate sports forecasts. We're currently working with the United Nations. They've been using Swarm to predict famines around the world. And what they find is when they have groups of people, and they might have just 20 people, logged in from around the world, experts in different aspects of famines, and when they work together as a swarm, they amplify their intelligence and they make better predictions. And so it's really about how can we use AI to keep people in the loop, not remove people, and leverage the fact that people are smart.
And for any of you that run teams that make the decisions, whether you're trying to allocate resources or decide which are 4 projects to do, and the voting thing hasn't usually worked, it seldom does, to come up with the best solution, I highly recommend you take a look at the website, how it works, and how you come to the best solution for everybody, not the one that votes out best. I thought it was phenomenal. But with that, I want to thank you for taking time to spend the day with us, and we really, really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, okay, so I am going to pull one more chair up and actually invite our Katya Hancock from Startup Health, who is going to lead us into our next group. We did one yesterday. It was phenomenal with Startup Health and 2 of their companies, and I'll turn over to you to introduce 2 of these startups and see what they're up to.
All right. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Katya. I want to introduce Victor Wang from Care.Coach, Nicholas Rosenkovich from Mindco Health. Welcome, guys. Thank you. So we are standing between you and lunch, so we'll try to keep you entertained. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves? If you weren't here yesterday, Startup Health is an impact investor in health. We've been investing in digital health startups for the last decade. We have the largest portfolio of digital health companies in the world, over 400 companies, 27 countries. These are 2 of our awesome portfolio companies who are solving health moonshots, the biggest health challenges of our time. So Victor, why don't you go first? Tell us about Care.Coach.
Thanks, Katya. I'm Victor, founder and CEO of Care.Coach, and we are solving the caregiver crisis. So much like Dr. Rosenberg's mindset about this, we are combining the best of humans and a global team of empathetic, conversationally intelligent humans with the best of AI. So if you go to the rear right-hand side of the exhibit hall, you'll see a little round top table there with a little dog on there. And you might have turned into a cat, I don't know, but if he's sleeping, you can pet him on the head and wake it up. But that little avatar, it's fun, it's lighthearted, it's non-judgmental, but it's this avatar for this global team of people that we're employing. Because it turns out there's actually plentiful workforce. There's plentiful compassion, empathy, and conversational intelligence. They're just distributed across the world. And so that's kind of like the face of that team. And then we have software algorithms that guide this team around the world to then execute evidence-based coaching protocols and affect the behavior of, say, a 75-year-old person with 5 chronic conditions and depression, discharged from the hospital for a joint replacement. And not only are we praying with this person and talking with this person about their grandkids and building a trusted 24/7 relationship in the home, but also coaching behavior to prevent a readmission, for example. So we sell into Medicare Advantage health plans as well as other types of health plans and improve member experience, reduce long-term care costs, reduce acute care utilization.
And quickly just tell us, you have amazing results in terms of reduction of depression, hospital readmission. Maybe you can share some of that. data?
Yes, yeah. So we have our health plans have white papers. So there's a nonprofit called Leading Age, kind of like play on leading edge, I guess. But Leading Age, if you go there, you can see some white papers from our customers about how our avatars reduce the need for home nursing visits. So people are coached by our avatar to take better care of themselves. So you don't have to send as many nurse visits to their home, and they go to the ER and acute care less. And actually, we have a Stanford paper as well. I originally started the company just to solve senior loneliness, and so we did a study, and Stanford has it published in JMIR about how when you put our avatars at the bedside on an inpatient basis for a hospitalized older adult population, we reduce loneliness on the UCLA loneliness scale by 3 times more than the control, which was having a daily visit from a nursing student, and p-value less than 0.01.
Awesome. We'll have more to dig in there, but Nicholas, go ahead and introduce what you guys are up to.
Fantastic, Vikitor. Appreciate. In my case, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mindco Health. We developed and distribute technology using virtual reality to alleviate the cost of healthcare, specifically for behavioral health and mental health. The kind of like continuing the conversation that just happening here over the last couple of hours, the way that we use VR is actually to use the power of the technology to put the brain and body of the individuals to feel being immersed in a situation that will trigger different sensations and emotions. So all of this artificial or virtual triggering of all of these sensations and bodily sensations, brain reactions that are related to a specific behavior, we can use all of that to change the automatic pilot of the reactions for behavior. So understanding that concept of using virtual reality to trigger different sensations and reactions and change those, that's the cornerstones to change a behavior. We've been working with the Virtual Human Interactive Lab at Stanford. We published our papers co-authored by Johns Hopkins researchers, and our first results are that it's outstanding by more than 3-fold in efficacy when compared with standard of care. So when we put an individual, and our first product was for smoking cessation, now we are into stress management and also working towards burnout. So our first product for smoking cessation showed results that outstand 33% in efficacy when compared with nicotine patch or CBT counseling. The concept of is that delivering virtual reality has the capacity to change the brains in a way that you cannot achieve that in one-on-one sessions. You cannot train someone to be exposed, have the same feeling as you were in a real-life situation, to train your brain and body to change that reaction. That can be achieved in VR for a very short period of time. The brain does not distinguish if it's virtual or real. So once we get that trick being delivered, we can start changing the pattern of behavior. So that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, clinical trials, and now introducing this through health insurance.
So for the smoking cessation, you're putting people through VR in those typical situations where they're used to smoking?
Yeah. So many of you might have smoked or know someone that smokes. It's very common. So through clinical data, there are different environments that will trigger the cravings, sensations related with guilt, frustration, and several emotions related with that specific behavior. So we recreate those scenarios. So a smoker will be themselves being there in a group, and someone will give them a cigarette or ask them for light, or there will be a gather with a family, and someone will be looking at them with a judgmental look about their smoking status. And so all of those training, what we call is virtual reality mindful exposure training, and we call it mindful because we combine virtual reality cue exposure therapy with mindfulness interventions. The mindfulness works in a way that brings the individual to create awareness about the sensations and reactions and start changing the automatic pilot through breathing exercises, understanding the beginning of the cravings, the beginning of the reactions. So in time, the more you train, the faster you can change your behaviors.
And tell us a little bit more about the implications and the application for stress and also burnout. There's a lot of physicians in this room. Physician burnout is a big topic that's on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, so the beauty of the technology is that it can be delivered through addressing any behavioral process or mental health challenges, because the the way of introducing individuals in virtual reality to get them to feel exposed and triggered through, for example, a nurse in an ER room or with patients that are overloading with work. All of that triggers different levels of stress or distress and burnout. So those situations are also recreated in virtual reality. We are working with 2 pilots with 2 health systems with a healthcare workforce around stress and burnout. The main, and one of the things that I didn't mention before, everything and things that recently was mentioned in the previous conversation, technology is going towards developing everything towards the headsets. However, headsets today are around 40 million globally. So when you compare 40 million of headsets delivered globally, most of that's happening in the gamer space, not in other spaces. When you talk about patients, now there is billions of patients needing solutions that can be using this kind of technology. So everything that we deliver today and developed is using your smartphone, and we distribute a kit that you can use your smartphone to get yourself in virtual reality. So affordability, scalability, and efficient treatment, that's what we're after to alleviate the cost of health systems and improve patient outcomes.
That's awesome. That ability to scale it out and make it affordable is so key.
Get your free kit. Go to his website. It's like a little thing you put your phone into.
Yeah, it's basically.
I have one here if anyone then would like to see as well. Happy to do a demo.
Awesome. Thanks for that plug, Victor. Well, I love what you guys are doing, Victor, so much because I always think of my grandmother who passed away 2 years ago, was 95, and she loved cats. So she would have absolutely used one of your avatars. She wouldn't have used an app on a smartphone to connect with caregivers. Do you have any issues, though, around people being afraid of, Big Brother being in the room and privacy? And what's been the adoption like from seniors?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we found is it really helps to have a trusted referral. So when we get like a nurse that they know or their doctor to tell them, hey, your health plan's offering this new service, it really helps, and there's immediate trust there. Some of our larger deployments we have to cold call because some of these larger health plans don't have super high touch relationships with their members, and we have to basically cold call them and tell them that their health plan's offering this. And then sometimes, yeah, we'll get that kind of like, how do I know you're legitimate, and what is this? So it really helps to have that physician or otherwise kind of existing care team referral for sure. And then when people do adopt and talk with their avatar, what we find is they really open up because, we designed it that way. It's a little dog or cat, so people already tell their live dog or cat all sorts of stuff. They don't even tell their own families. And that's what we found with our avatars, too. Like I'm not even making this up. One guy woke up his little dog, and he was like, buddy, I just fell in the shower, and I think I'm kind of banged up, but okay. I don't think I'm, hurt, but just stay with me for a while. I think I'll be okay. Don't tell my daughter. She's going to put me in a nursing home if she finds out I'm falling in the shower. But then we find this out, and we still bring it back up with the care management team at the health plan, and they're able to put them on some Otago exercises for strength and balance and help prevent falls in the future that the avatar coaches them through. So yeah, people really open up. That's why we designed it that way. We designed it so it's based on this kind of fun, lighthearted, non-judgmental type of persona. And a lot of the time, we're not talking about super serious things like falls or incontinence or depression. A lot of times, we're just talking about Jeopardy or playing bingo with them or playing them their favorite Frank Sinatra song. So, yeah.
That's incredible. So, quickly tell the folks in the room a little bit about your business model and what types of people you're looking to meet in terms of partnerships or investors.
Sure, yeah. So we're currently in 2 of the nation's 3 largest Medicare Advantage insurers, always looking for more customers and more members that we can help, of course. So if you're looking for either cost of care reduction, so if you imagine, if you could wave a magic wand and give every member a supportive family member living with them 24/7, not dysfunctional family member, but good family member, who's nurse trained and has check-in calls regularly with their care management team and does exactly what you as the health plan would want to guide behavior. That's what we do. And so there's use cases for cost reduction and care utilization improvement. as well as member experience. So we have really interesting anecdotes where a member calls in to the health plan. They're like, hey, I want to switch my plan. I want to switch to this other insurer because you guys are no good. Wait, you're telling me my avatar dog that I talk with every day is bound to my plan? Okay, I'll just stay with you guys. So we're great for member experience and retention as well. And then investors too. So we're doing I think this is a private audience, so I'll say we're doing a Series A if you're a Series A stage VC or something like that.
Great. Some people might be more comfortable with a dysfunctional family member, so you might want to beta test a dysfunctional avatar. All right, so what about you, Nicholas? Tell us about your business model, types of people you're looking to partner with as we're wrapping up here.
Yeah, fantastic. So we came originally from the employers market, so understanding that we alleviate the cost of health by delivering behavioral health as a deliver at home and no need to go straight directly into an appointment. That's the basics of how we are utilizing technology to alleviate that cost. The same happens within the health systems and patient workflows. The way that we work, today we operate with the biggest insurance brokers in the world and also partnering with payers and insurance to distribute this through their members. The way that it works with patients is that it can work under population health as a preventive measure before entering an acute journey for chronic disease related for cardiac, cardiology or nephrology, oncology. Actually, we are running a study with cancer patients at Stanford with Jody Prochaska, which it's a fantastic study to how individuals can actually have all the other means to change their behaviors, but choosing these at-home, anonymous, and also effective solution. So the way it works is as a preventive solutions, but also as an extension for primary care and subspecialties to deliver behavioral health as an add-on and extension to their treatment. So most of caregivers are not experts in behavioral health, and it's except for therapies that are designed and are also specialized in that. But any patient are in need in some level of behavioral support. So our technology works in that way, filling that gap. So that's usually how we are working this. Today we're raising a seed round that is about to be closed with seed investors. So as well, if they're in the audience, there are seed VCs, happy to talk. And if not as well, happy to talk with all of you and happy to show the demo that we have.
And I saw on your website, and I know it's in stealth mode, but you're exploring the solution for teens as well. I've been closely following, I have younger children, but still the silent pandemic of mental health for teens. The Surgeon General's been talking about this. I think that's really incredible. Maybe you can briefly share about
Yeah, thanks, Katia. There is a university involved and also one of the biggest game platforms. So understanding how to get, one of the biggest challenges for adolescents is how to get them to address their health needs. They're not aware, and if they're aware, they don't want to be told what to do about it. And so I'm not a father. I've been a kid, but we know, and we're studying this, all these challenges, how to deliver this. So one of the things is how to get to them where they are. So through gaming and utilizing most of these technologies, it's a huge approach and a huge advantage to deliver care and improve mental health and among other substances, for example, vaping and SUDs as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, both of you. And we'll see you guys at lunch.
Thanks. Thank you.